Welcome back. You're watching Startup Central with me, Nayantara, working from home. This is the only show of its kind on Indian television dedicated to startups, innovation, technology, disruption. Basically, if it falls under the gambit of the new economy, it's here every weekday at 6 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, are we about to see the world's biggest IPO in the days to come? And it is going to be, in all likelihood, it's looking like, from ANT Financial, founded by Jack Ma himself. It's planning to raise $35 billion via this IPO. It has raised its target for the IPO from $250 billion to about $250 billion, up from the earlier target of $225 billion, which basically means that this IPO can be the world's largest. It can also beat, and it's looking like if it's a success, it will beat the Saudi Aramco IPO. Now, ANT is planning to list simultaneously in Hong Kong as well as Shanghai. It could exceed Bank of America's market capitalization. It could be more than twice the size of Citigroup. It can generate 72.5 billion yuan in revenue in the first half. That's what it has said. It posted a big profit of 21 billion yuan also, and it gets a bulk of its revenue from providing quick consumer loans. Now, of course, as you all know, ANT Financial has a decent presence in India as well. It has been investing in the Indian startup universe. So will the world's largest IPO have any impact in India? That too at a time when India has said, given the geopolitical tensions, given the spar at the borders, we will be screening money coming in from China and Chinese investors. I'm going to be discussing this with Siddharth Pai as well as Mr. K Ganesh, who are joining us right here on Startup Central. Siddharth, let me come to you first. So ANT Financial right now looking like it can have the world's largest IPO. And like I said, it has a pretty good portfolio in India, but will any Indian startup stand to gain from it? Can it gain from it?
Yeah, so Nayantara, I think so. The ANT Financial IPO has actually been one of the most hotly anticipated IPOs for quite some time. The only one that was more anticipated in this was actually WeWork, and everyone saw what happened to WeWork over there. But I think with regard to India, especially, what ANT is going to signal is the fact that fintech's actually becoming mainstream as of now. It's actually entering into the public markets, and it's just beginning of the next wave of fintech that we're actually going to see. And India and Indian companies, especially Indian fintech companies that are actually working in these adjacent spaces of payments, of payments processing, investing, and the whole gamut of services. I think they're going to see a large amount of investor interest actually come on board the moment ANT Financial's IPO goes through, and the fact that a large number of investors are going to come in. One of the primary reasons for that is not actually going to be the Chinese money that's actually going to come into India. All of us, of course, know for a fact ever since Press Note 3 came out, there are certain restrictions on that particular money coming in from countries that share a land border with India. But what that's going to signal to the rest of the market is the Chinese ecosystem has always been a closed ecosystem. USA has always been dominated by the large giants, but India is going to be the last sort of untapped market in the entire world, where we've had a large degree of internet penetration thanks to the geo effect. A large number of people with smartphones because of the low-cost handsets that have actually come in as of now, and because of what UPI is actually set up and what demonetization actually caused in terms of education, a vast populace of the entire country who's actually very used to transacting online. So we have the right systems in place in order for us to actually start leveling up. At the moment ANT actually goes through, all of us in the startup ecosystem do expect a large amount of capital to start coming in. So India can finally start creating its own version or its own sort of a version of ANT Financials, and someone can actually take over. Someone can actually look at consolidating the entire India market as time goes by.
Okay, but that obviously will be some time off. We've all been reading how the prospectus of ANT Financial boasts about how it is, so powerful in India's payment ecosystem because of being the largest shareholder when it comes to, for example, Paytm. It has invested in so many of India's unicorn stories. K Ganesh, if I can come to you for this, do you agree with Siddharth? It's going to take a long time, though. I'm playing devil's advocate here, for us to have an alternative to ANT Financial, and is it going to also come to a situation where we say, okay, we don't want Chinese money, but we'll take American money?
No, I think there are two different issues. I agree with Siddharth in what you mentioned. I think we should differentiate between Chinese investments in India and the current geopolitical situation that makes it very emotional and highly charged, and rightly so, about Chinese investments, concerns of privacy, and all of those. That needs to be handled at the political, diplomatic, economic, trade level, and all of those. I am with you on all of that. That's only one aspect. The other aspect is, what does this IPO mean for India, Indian entrepreneurship ecosystem, Indian startup? I think one, the power of platforms, the power of bringing technology and finance, marrying it together to create a powerful platform with large transaction, I think is unquestioned. If you look at the valuation of ANT financials, what they're looking at is multiple times of PayPal or companies like those, which are purely financial companies. And after the pandemic, financial companies have been lagging, whereas the tech stocks have been booming here. So I think the learning for us is one, that if you're able to create platforms, it is great. Of course, and financials may not come, but we already have good platforms emerging. If you take Flipkart with PhonePe and others, if you take Paytm, for example, if you take the Geo story, even Amazon to some extent, or like platforms consolidating multiple aspects. Now, what has Ant Financials done? Greatly, starting with something like Alipay, which is pure payments, went on to become Ant Financials. Now they're talking about Ant Technology. Now it looks to be seen whether Indian market, Indian ecosystem, how much of tech they value in the fintech and how much of finance they value in the fintech. So a relative valuation of tech versus finance will determine the valuation. I think there is huge learning, and there's a lot of optimism that by creating platform, but by marrying technology, finance, transaction, payments, and virtually every services on the phone across India, right from education to healthcare, you can create large, valuable companies, solve India's problems, and give to users at the nook and corners of India the ability to transact with a very cheap smartphone and a very cheap internet, which was impossible. I think that's extremely promising. We should not confuse signals of Ant Financial's IPO and business model for Indian entrepreneurs with Chinese investment. I am hoping Chinese investments will clear out as long as it is minority investment, as long as it is not board control, as long as it is not with veto power, as long as Indian entrepreneurs are running it, owning it, controlling the majority of the board and decisions, I think it should be fine to have Chinese money. That's my view, the way I look at it, because ultimately, even with Chinese money, all the jobs are getting created in India, all the problems are getting solved in India. Indian consumers are getting the discounts and the conveniences, and Chinese investors are paying for it. Why would you say no to it? As long as India's sovereignty, integrity is protected, and we are able to take care of our data privacy and other concerns.
Okay, and K Ganesh, I want to ask you one other question. You've also invested in some startups that have and Financial, Alibaba, and all as investors. Is there tension, or is there something that is a tension? Is there any pressure to replace the Chinese investors in some of India's largest startups?
No, no, there is absolutely no pressure to replace the Chinese investor in India startup. Obviously, there is an overhang uh, and challenge that if you have to take more money from Chinese investors now, even as you speak, we will need government permission. Obviously, if it happens that the Chinese investor is holding majority or is likely to hold majority, then it definitely is a matter of concern. But fortunately, in our startup, that is not the case. It is minority investment. It is one or two seats on the board, which is not controlled by them. There are no veto powers singularly that a Chinese investor can change. So as long as those are not there, it's not a challenge. But for some startups where Chinese investors have more than 51% or a majority on the board control, it can become challenging or a matter of concern even now. Otherwise, the only challenge is to the extent that earlier we could have gone and raised money from Chinese investors who are aggressive. Now raising money from Chinese investors in the current environment and mahol, as we call it in Hindi, becomes slightly challenging because not likely to happen. But there is absolutely no pressure to replace whatsoever. The government is very pragmatic about it. While they have announced the programs, they have also said, come to us for approval. We know approval is difficult, approval will take time. Therefore, entrepreneurs are taking the easier route, but by not going to Chinese.
Oh.
Okay, we seem to have lost our connection with K Ganesh over there. I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short commercial break. So that's the status as far as Chinese companies' investments in the Indian startup story goes. And we were, of course, discussing with respect to Ant Financial's IPO, could be the world's largest. Siddharth, you stay with us. We're going to be breaking a big story on the other side of Startup Central. Would love to have your comments on them. Ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned for it. It's to do with Google. We'll give you a hint. It also includes something to do with the Play Store. It'll have something to do with payments as well. Stay tuned.